Welcome to Investments for Impact. This is a Vilgro Africa podcast, and this particular season of the podcast is happening on the sidelines of the International Development Innovation Alliance Summit happening in Nairobi. And we're going to be discussing government and private sector perspectives on investing in research and innovation. So I think to kick our discussion off, I'd like to invite you to just introduce yourself. We start with you, Nivi. Talk about who you are and what kind of work you do, and maybe frame it within the context of IDIA, because we are at the IDIA Summit.
Sure. My name is Nivi Sharma. I'm the CEO of FICA, formerly known as Bridges to Prosperity. We have built and supported and assisted and influenced 750 bridges all over the world, 21 different countries. And we are now working in Rwanda, Uganda, Ethiopia, and Zambia, really honing down that we have served 5 million people, and there's hundreds of millions more to serve, who are cut off from critical destinations because of a river, because of a ravine. What kind of infrastructure do they need, especially in rural areas, to reach hospitals, markets, schools? And how do we get those built at scale rather than having to do it ourselves? We are a nonprofit, not a private sector organization, but in everything we do, we work closely with development agencies, with funders, with government partners, with innovators. And so that's what makes us a stand-up member of IDEA, because we really follow their thinking and align very closely with their philosophy around collaboration and the need to work towards systems change at large scale.
Thank you. Over to you, Nashiru, for your introduction.
Yes, thank you. My name is Nashiru Salifu from Ghana. I work with Ghana's Ministry for Environment, Science, Technology. It used to be with innovation, but now it's just science and technology. So basically what we do as a ministry, we happen to be the principal advisor to government when it comes to matters of environment, science, and technology. And as you are aware, for every science and technology program, research and development is very key. And so one of our primary mandates is to support the funding of research, not only research, but research infrastructure, technology development, and innovation. And that's what basically we do. And the interest is not just to fund research, but the impacts the research and innovation program has on the economy of Ghana and the good people of Ghana. And so for that reason, there's always the need to also institutionalize ecosystem coordination. As you know, science and technology is very transversal. It cuts across many sectors. And so that ecosystem coordination is very critical. And those are one of the activities, or some of the activities I lead as a Deputy Director for Science and Technology in the ministry.
Good, thank you. So part of what we wanted to discuss in this conversation is the funding context globally. So I do know from you that 80% of Ghana's funding was external. So if you could speak a bit to the implications of this funding shift, how has it impacted you as a ministry, and how are you responding?
So generally, 80% of funding, research and innovation funding, was donor-driven, like I rightly said. That relationship was heavily between Ghanaian researchers in the universities and then their counterparts and then the donors that they normally apply to. It's not something that government has regulated, but in trying to understand the amount of investment we have in research and development, there was the need to conduct a survey, and we realized that about 80% of research and innovation funding comes from external sources. Government of Ghana itself has estimated our contribution to R&D at 0.3% of GDP. What it then means is that no matter the amount of funding we receive as a country is still low. The target was supposed to be 1% of GDP. Now that we have dwindling donor support, what it then means is that our research and innovation program is going to be heavily affected. We have to cut down on the program. And usually when there are policy shifts, international policy shifts or development policy shifts like this, it will take some time for you to adjust because it came to us without notice. And so it will take some time. But what I said was that in the interim, what government has done has taken the bold decision to establish a national research fund. Now, if you are interested in building an innovative economy, there are conditions precedents. And that condition must be you must invest first. You must invest in research and development. You must invest in critical sectors like TVET, technical vocational education training. So all these spaces are spaces government is establishing funds to do so. The National Research Fund has been established. There's also the conversation of having a TVET fund. Basically, these are the key primary instruments we have in our sector to drive research and innovation development. That is the response we have. However, there are other government instruments, like I mentioned, the public-private partnership law that sets a framework for you to engage the private sector to co-invest in critical research and development infrastructure. That is what is being encouraged. There are also other programs or projects. In fact, one of the projects, RACER Fund, that is supported by FCDO is running is how to mobilize private equity and venture capital funding and pensions funds to augment the government funding we have for innovation in Ghana.
Thank you very much. Picking up on this whole idea of financing innovation, I would like to ask you maybe to speak a bit about how you have worked traditionally with the private sector and what it means going forward in this funding context.
Well, so it's been a major challenge, and I won't say the challenge exists only in Ghana. Mm-hmm. It's a peculiar challenge in the whole of Africa, except some countries that are doing well now, like South Africa, Kenya, and some of the countries in North Africa. There's always been a gap between academia and industry. It's a bridge that a lot of African countries are trying to deal with. So I wouldn't say we have a lot of case studies and success stories when it comes to the relationship between industry, private sector, and research. But there are a few that we are very proud to share. For instance, there's a major company in Ghana called Casapreco. It's like a beverage or liquor company that has done so well, that has scaled to an extent of creating thousands of jobs in Ghana across the value chain. So that is a typical example. But these are relationships that were understood between these research institutions and then the private sector. One of the major challenges is to get the private sector to understand the need to, introduce technology and research into their businesses. So you realize that anytime there's the Global Innovation Index, when it comes to business sophistications, where companies or industries are supposed to have like researchers, scientists in their business, we rank low when it comes to that. So that is a major challenge in Ghana, and we are working as a ministry to address that. Some of the steps we have taken to address that is having forums. So we have the Science and Technology Forum that brings academia and industry together to showcase what they do and then discuss how they can collaborate to advance the improvement of products and services in their company. We've also had some projects, the Ghana Jobs and Skills projects, which my ministry is part of. We've had matchmaking sessions where we bring researchers and startups in particular together for them to identify, share the problems they want to address in their businesses for researchers to support them. There are other platforms like the Ghana Research and Industry Collaborative, which in that case, we've had some success stories. We have been able to map out some startups, identify some startups that are actually receiving support, funding support, commercialization support, and technical support to scale up. That is happening. So there are quite a number of programs currently in Ghana that we are doing so. But one of the things we want to do to institutionalize this relationship is this. Having a national research fund we have spoken about the disconnect between research and commercialization far too long in our countries. And so, we're cognizant of that. So, just after establishing a national research fund, one of the things we think we should do is to have either a regulation or a policy that incentivizes that relationship by creating technology transfer offices at the various universities and research institutions, and also creating benefit sharing mechanisms amongst these universities and researchers that actually are able to innovate to support industrial growth. The thinking is that once you're able to do that, and then you create new industries out of the technologies you generate, government, the burden of job creation on government is shared with the private sector. When the private sector is doing well, they pay taxes and government gets some returns from its investment on research and development. So a lot is happening to bridge this gap. And I think there's just so much more we can do by learning from other countries that have done that are doing well both in Africa, Europe, and Asia.
Good. So on the one hand, you're working with the existing private sector, large companies, but also you've created a fund to sort of catalyze the growth of early stage businesses.
Stimulate that.
Wonderful. Yeah. So to you, Nivi, during one of the panels here at the conference, you talked about having run a 5-year study. And I think in one of the discussions we were having on the side, you said that sometimes you struggle with this idea that we have to justify the problem. Could you speak a bit to that and, that struggle?
Yeah, you've just talked about the disconnect between research and commercialization. I don't know if I agree that commercialization should be our goal. We started this as we started a 5-year randomized control trial, and we've done quasi-experiments as well, but really wanted to push this agenda forward that rural infrastructure development, these low-cost, climate-smart interventions are dollar for dollar good for the economy, good for livelihoods. And it's really hard to randomize the delivery of infrastructure, first of all, on an operational level, on a political level. Very difficult to explain to a politician that, no, your community will not get a bridge because it's not the computer that randomized the order in which bridges would be delivered, even though there was just a woman who died on her way to a clinic the other day. So that was a really hard and uncomfortable part of research. And of course, we know there's so many ethical dilemmas with randomization and research in general. But after that, 5 years later, here we are. We have the undeniable, irrefutable proof that the ROI on rural infrastructure is really high, probably higher than most development interventions that we have. But all through, none of us thought we weren't going to get there. I didn't, when I joined the organization from the private sector, I said, what on earth are we doing research? What are we going to prove at the end of this? That infrastructure is good, that children shouldn't die on their way to school, that sick people should get to clinic, that farmers will grow differently when they have a shorter travel time to markets. So it wasn't so much about the proof, and I got away from that. So I struggled very much with the fact that we're proving something that we already know, but rather that here are really useful data points for governments to make decisions. Really important data points for governments to decide, should we, if our priority is maternal health or our priority is agriculture, boosting agriculture, then where should we spend money on infrastructure to support that? So we really think about that in terms of data points rather than proof, because we shouldn't have to justify with research, with numbers, with RCTs, the things that we already know, the things that we're already seeing, the stories and the information that we already have about lives and opportunities being lost.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful.
I think just it depends on the context. Mm-hmm. You are speaking in the context of an organization that is specific and focused on a particular sector. So the workings of government is a bit different. So depending on the research agenda you have, every research agenda has an objective. In fact, in Ghana, we have a building and road research institute. One of the things or some of the things they do is to identify and research into alternative building materials, cheap building materials that could actually help rural housing. And so it depends on the agenda. The issue of commercialization comes in because the major driver of industrialization has always been science and technology. And so the primary objective of every science and technology ministry is, first of all, to transform your economy. And that is why to do so, commercialization becomes very important. So that was just a point of correction, just to let you understand why the issue of commercialization has become important.
Thank you. So I was going to pick up on some of your points, Nivi. You pivoted from building bridges yourselves to a point where you are now facilitating the building of bridges, which I think is a brilliant approach, considering that you're an NGO, and I imagine that you're raising funding to build these bridges. So going back to your point earlier about having to run a 5-year RCT to justify the problem, what are some of the other approaches that you would recommend, particularly in this changing context, that could help us to accelerate progress faster? And maybe you can speak to some of the ones that you're implementing in the areas where you work.
I think we do need to move towards more linear approaches towards experimentation, learning, and proving theories and so on. We also want the work to speak for itself. There was a while ago some hype around results-based financing and so on. But what I'm finding more and more is that we wish funders would shift their mindset, or should I say mindsets, because every funder is so idiosyncratic in what it wants. One funder wants really raw, just unit cost per economic data on what does the dollar spent on a bridge do to the economy, to farmers, to livelihoods. The other funders want to do some funny maths around the cost of saving the life of a child, or ensuring a child's attendance at school increases from 60% to 80%. And I find that very hard to do, but some funders try to do that anyway. They call it moral weighting, which is if a child's life or a child is prevented to die before the age of 5, there's a moral weighting of 116, for example. And I'm not sure how that math works out, but it's an attempt to quantify. And then you have funders who want to hear the human interest story, that tell me about the woman named Francine on her way to access a job at a garment factory. And so every funder, and then you have the funders who are, really saying, tell me about your systems change. Tell me about your partnerships with the government. What does the government have to say about you? Because that's where the proof of the pudding is.
Yes.
Tell me about how you've scaled your intervention. So here we are in an environment where every funder wants a different story. So that means I have to hire different sets of resources in my organization, not to go out and build bridges or get bridges built, but to comply with reporting standards, to do research, to package stories, and to do something a little different for every funder. So, I really want to push funders to, it's not my job to tell you how to do it, but get together, have some consensus on what it takes to deploy philanthropic capital, in this case, to either governments or to implementers, what moves what amount of capital.
I like that we need consensus among funders, which will make your work easier, because you're the one who's doing the hard work. You're on the front line. But tied to that, and the point earlier about the human interest story, I'm very curious to hear about that human level impact of your work. If you could speak a bit to some of the results that you've seen, not that speak to funders and what funders want, but that make you as a human being when you go to bed at night to feel that I've done something, I've created a change in the world and I'm happy with myself.
One of the reasons I love my job so much is because it touches on almost every dimension of poverty and development that you can think of. When you build a bridge or when you build infrastructure that provides access, kids are getting to school safely and reliably all year round. Some of the places where we're building a bridge, 9 months of the year, it's a very dry ravine that children are skipping over. But for 3 months, if a child is left behind, and often it's the girls, the boys are said, okay, you just risk it and go. But these girls or the small ones stay at home. Either you'll be washed away, you'll die on your way to school, or you'll be stranded on the other side and have to sleep there. God knows what other dangers lie for you in that scenario. So education. Then there's healthcare, just being able to get to a clinic, being able to access emergency care, prenatal, postnatal care. Having to make those decisions that now my baby is due during the rainy season. Am I going to risk it and have a home birth? How am I going to get to the clinic? What are my options here? We shouldn't have to be making those kind of decisions. Farmers getting to market. So we've seen farmers change the types of crops they're growing. So to change to things like potatoes, even though they're heavier, because now they know they have a shorter distance to walk. We know farmers change the amount of their land from 20% to 80% of their land that they're farming on, utilizing a lot more of their land. We've seen farmers spend more money on investing on farm inputs, on fertilizer and irrigation products and so on. But all of these are really easy. They're, easy to quantify. We do that often. We present that information often. But I don't always like fitting into these development buckets and boxes that tell us the number of increase of income levels, women entering the labor force and so on. But sometimes it's just people deserve safe access to visit their friends, to go to church, for teenagers to hang out in the evenings, for lovers to meet. One of my favorite stories was two people who lived on opposite sides of the river getting married. And we had a whole cake and a celebration for them because you're not going to ever put that into scientific development research outcome. Yeah. But it's still a worthwhile cause for us to get behind, for us to think that we should be doing more of this. Because, actually some of the science that we put behind really big investments, expressways, toll roads, railroads, the math behind that is also not adding up. So if that math is not mathing, we should...
Some of these investments are social investments, so you don't have to necessarily quantify immediately. They are long-term, and then the impact usually is difficult to quantify. So it depends on who is handling it. For us, in the context of government, usually there's definitely a ministry responsible for that. Maybe a ministry for local government and rural development we had in Ghana would be concerned with how you would bring these two communities to bridge. And nobody would ask you to quantify the science and technology or research investment that I put in.
Especially local government, they know. We're never convincing someone in local government that you need better infrastructure. Oh, they fund this. It's the funders. It's the funders that are making it happen. So if we're going to deploy capital, philanthropic capital, donor capital, bilateral, multilateral capital, that reliance on because there's no rural community in the USA where a child is dying on their way to school that needs to do research before getting funded. So let's the implementers know it, the governments know it. There is a gap on what the funders are demanding in terms of research and evidence for deploying their capital.
Wonderful. And that leads us to, I guess, our final question, which is to what extent does your experience and this thinking present an opportunity now that we have to think more about domestic resource mobilization. So for you, Nashiru, maybe you could start off and tell us, you sit here at government, national government level, to what extent do you have visibility on, the kind of context that Nivi is talking about, and to what extent is your work able to translate to results for someone like her and for her beneficiaries, especially now that you're going to be financing most of the research yourself?
Yes. So what I would say is that already about 80% of the work we do as a ministry from the research and innovation point of view is for public good. Because if you take the space of agriculture, for instance, a lot of the crop varieties, improved seedlings that are churned out of research and innovation from our research councils or research institutions and universities are transferred to the Ministry of Agriculture for extension to farmers. And that comes at no cost, right? Government invests in that. And so in that context, we are already doing that. Usually, we look at the other context where sustainability comes in. So beyond providing this public good research, you also need to have an element that brings some returns so you can sustain your research and innovation program. But there are a lot of social interventions in the work that we do. Basically, as a government, if you are funding research and innovation, usually it's for the public good. Is to make sure that the economy does well, the society benefits from the research you conduct. So depending on the research program we have, we are able to identify which research programs are targeted at, let's say, rural communities or underprivileged communities, and the research that is targeted at industry. Obviously, when it comes to that, the economics of it comes in, right? But I'm actually a big advocate of also private sector participation and also private capital into innovation. That is because, like we rightly discussed this morning, there's a lot of venture capital funding around the world that is looking for pipelines. And sometimes you have ecosystems that you have startups that have not been built to the level of attracting this funding. So I think one of the major responsibilities for any research and innovation governments, any ministry or government responsible for that space is to strengthen your ecosystem, build the skills and talents that gets them to the level of attracting foreign financing to support their startup development.
I'll give you a really good example of one that I've been thinking is if we are successful, then hundreds of bridges are getting built in every country that we're in, or even the countries that we're not in. We used to build a bridge with timber decking, and they didn't last long. And the contract that citizens have with their governments to maintain these bridges was not kept, so they would wear out. So then we made the decision that the best maintenance is no need for maintenance, so we will switch to steel decking.
Right.
Now there is a new question of these innovations with plastic. Recycled plastic that have been collected from everywhere. Can we turn that into planking and decking and so on? And it would be great for a venture capitalist to pump money into doing the research of how long do these planks last compared to timber, compared to steel? Because if so, that would be a great alternative.
Yes.
But to always kind of put that onus on the civil society, on government, is not right. The private sector, who are going to make money from this, who are responsible for a lot of the plastic waste, that would be a good example of the kind of research.
If your industry contributes to plastic pollution, and there's a very good use for plastic waste in the bridge construction industry, why not? Why can't you support research and innovation in that space?
True. Yeah. If you're contributing to plastic Coca-Cola, then you should be researching what happens to that bottle for 100, 200 years that someone's going to drink, maybe just a sip of before they throw away.
Yeah, and perhaps going back to government, maybe what you could do as part of your strategy is to provide incentives for the private sector, particularly multinationals, for instance, to make this kind of investments. Yeah, so we have come to the end of our conversation. I'm very happy that we had this chat, and I just want to summarize by saying what I hear you saying, Nashiru, is that on the one hand, the whole goal of science and technology is to be able to commercialize, but yet
transform your economy.
Yes, transform your economy. Commercialize to transform your economy, and I also see the tensions that you face between, being able to achieve the social good, but also needing to see some return on in investment to achieve sustainability. And I also really liked your perspectives, Nivi, particularly around acting faster with data points that already exist to be more efficient with scarce capital. But then beyond that, being so engaged and part of communities that you solve real pain points for them, and in a way that particularly now we don't have to sort of bucket our impact in frameworks, but rather just listen to what we're hearing on the ground and solving those problems. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So thank you very much, Nivi. Thank you very much, Nashiru. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.